take her in as his ward is a pretty, I mean, that says something about his character, even though maybe not as much as we would like it to say, but it's certainly, I mean, that's pretty huge.
Well,
Yeah.
and even though he doesn't give her like the paternal love that we like might want him to, he still provides her with like Sophie and Jane. Like he's paying their expenses and they're like literally giving her the world. Like Jane is teaching her. Miss Fairfax was just like this like sweet woman who's like loving her and like just wants to like clean the house and that's her whole thing. And she does have this like army of people who are loving her. And while they might not be her parents, like they are loving her. At least it's not like Jane's situation where the people she's living with who like could have loved her didn't and like abused her. She is getting love in other ways, even if it's not from Mr. Rochester. And honestly, at this time, could you blame him? I mean, for all we know, she's the product of an affair, and that, I mean, that's still taboo. Like having a child outside of wedlock in an affair, that's still a taboo subject to talk about. I can imagine that as much as we wouldn't want to ostracize those children, they're probably still ostracized in our home. So we can't blame Mr. Rochester for at the time still providing for her. He could, like Billing said, he could have done absolutely nothing with this child. Could have left her in France. Could have not cared, but brought her in and like gave her everything that he could besides like paternal love, because that was like really difficult for him apparently. He's emotionally closed off anyway. But like, yeah, I think that's important that he still is giving her like a lot, even in the sense of love, because like he's choosing people that like are providing for her and loving her and giving her what they can.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of talked about Mr. Rochester, let's talk about him for a second, because he's a very interesting man. Does anyone want to make just any general observations about, you know, him, his character as a whole? You know, we've read a good portion of him, so if you want to give us examples of where you find this in the text, that would be awesome. Just tell us your general impression of him and where you get that. And if it could be somebody who hasn't spoken yet, that would be amazing. I'm sorry, Shelly.
I think it's interesting that your first impression of him isn't of him directly, but of Mrs. Fairfax's vision of him. And Mrs. Fairfax is like a very like kind woman who like owns the house, but like doesn't own the house. But when she talks about him, she talks about him in such a way that is like distant, where she doesn't want to say anything bad, but she also doesn't know him.
Right. Yes. She knows that his character is good, but he hasn't really been around for her to really know him. Anything else?
I think he might be the reason that people have that assumption that governesses are seductive to their masters. I think he's the reason for that misconception.
Yeah, he certainly took a liking to her pretty quick, or at least he was amused by her and interested by her. Yeah, I definitely think. And, you know, there is something about, you know, an intelligent woman coming into your household and, you know, taking care of your kids, what that would do. So, yes, I could definitely see where that would come into play. Anything else? Okay, well, we will have plenty of observations about him, and we really have been this whole time talking about him. So I am glad to move on from him. I do want to talk about Blanche, or Blanche, or I don't know.
Blanche.
I say Blanche. Thank you. Okay, great. I was like, have I been saying this character's name wrong in my head this whole time? So what do you all think of her and, you know, our first meeting of her? Yes, Marley. Dang, you all really are just, you could say these out loud.
Can I say something out loud?
Yes, you can.
Okay. I think that she's definitely very annoying at first, shallow, all the good things that we said in the chat. But I think it's really important to remember that for the time period, that was typical. I mean, that was just like what a lot of women were like they wanted to marry men for their money, like that was just that. So I think that while I was reading, I really had to take a step back and stop being so like judgmental and being like, well, she's the worst person ever, because while Jane is a lot cooler, she's definitely someone that's typical for the time period, unfortunately.
I also had that problem. I just wanted to yell at her the whole time. I was like, you're so shallow, and Jane's so cool, and you're being so mean, and you just want Mr. Rochester for his money. You're a terrible person. But then I was like, Callie, she's an upper class woman. She's gonna have to marry rich. I know that, but I don't want to, because I like to think that if I were an upper class lady of that time, I would have been nice to Jane Eyre. But there's definitely a lot of internalized misogyny. Not even just her, because like, didn't we see other characters like talking bad about governesses literally right in front of Jane? Like, I just think that's ugly. I just think that's really ugly. I feel like I would be classy enough to not even talk bad about them right in front of them. Like, I'd like to think that, but I also understand where she's coming from, unfortunately.
Yes. Marley touched on something really important in the chat, and I really want to make sure that we get to it. Because we see her as kind of a rival to Jane, do you think that